Hello, for my capstone project, I am doing adolescent substance abuse, looking at family involvement in adolescent substance abuse, the risk factors associated with reasons that adolescents do turn to substance use, and just some successful tips from prevention programs that have worked in the past. And it's definitely important to learn from those because that is how we can update and make sure that we're running the proper techniques in the prevention programs we are using today. So first, my overview of the capstone. I'm primarily interested in adolescent substance abuse. It seems to be on the rise, especially in the area that I live in lately. And I like to look at the reasons why and the reasons that we can help cut that down. I also looked at family involvement in adolescent substance abuse because family and the atmosphere that the adolescent live in can really tell the tale of why they turn to substances. I think it's important for family involvement, and I think it's also important for us as professionals to look at the family atmosphere and what in that family atmosphere might contribute to the reasons that adolescents use. In one of the articles I used, it talks about how the habits and the attitudes toward mind-altering chemicals that parents have are significantly related to those of their children. If a parent is saying that it's okay to drink, it's okay to use drugs, that using substances is the norm, then the adolescent might interpret that as, hey, it's okay if my parents said it was. Another thing that I looked at was effective prevention plan strategies. I didn't look at so much as what programs worked, it's more of what pieces of the programs work. I think that one of the most important things that we can do is look at the research from all the prevention plans that have been used and taught in the school system so that we can decide what we should pull from it and how to use that in order to better our programs. I also looked at the risk factors that played into adolescent substance abuse. Like I said before, why and how family involvement is important, and the strategies that are helpful and that should be shared amongst professionals. Okay, so for a key finding from the literature review that I did, I looked a lot at risk factors, and I noticed that one of the biggest risk factors is the family atmosphere and the family dynamic and how that plays a role. A student or an adolescent who is like just having discomfort at home, their parents are arguing, their parents are using substances, might learn to cope through substance abuse. Another important thing within the family atmosphere is if the adolescent has an older sibling who's using substances, the availability and the chance of that adolescent using the substance becomes much more real because it will be easier for that adolescent to obtain. I looked at societal issues of race, gender, and risky behavior. These are huge risk factors. When an adolescent starts to use substances, their risky behaviors can increase. That could be unprotected sex, that could be sharing drug paraphernalia, all sorts of different risky behaviors. And one of the biggest things is gender and race. I also looked into a couple articles that talked about bullying and how sometimes that can really play into the self-esteem of the adolescent, which then drugs look like an easy coping mechanism for that adolescent. For the family involvement, I looked at the selection effects in an article by Hill and his colleagues in 2010. The selection effects talked about the reasons that the adolescent would be more likely to use substances. Selection such as a bad family, not getting along with peers, availability of the substances. I also looked at neighborhood influence when the child or the adolescent is not supervised properly. If the adolescent has parents who are not readily available, who are not home all the time, or if they come from a single family home, we do have to look at the neighborhood influence because the people around the adolescent who are maybe supervising them or are spending a lot of time with the adolescent are going to have an influence, especially if the parent isn't around as much in order to kind of help filter out the bad influences. In terms of prevention plan tips, I looked at the importance of socioeconomic status. It seems as though adolescents who come from lower income families are more likely to have some type of substance abuse issue. And we need to keep that in mind when we're looking at prevention planning, because in order to have a successful prevention plan, we have to make sure that we're targeting the proper areas. There's also the social influence model to change behaviors and attitudes of adolescents, which I found in an article. The social influence model helps to kind of reframe the way of thinking that the adolescent has, and to think about their influences, and to kind of consider the things that they really should be paying attention to, and not so much their influences in the social world. For procedures and evaluations, I based my entire capstone project on a literature review. So I looked at articles, I did research, I compiled data, I looked at the different things that the authors have put together and the research that they've done in order to kind of get a really good take on adolescent substance abuse. In the field that I work in, I am in the field right now, the agency I work in, we see a lot of adolescents that come through that have all different kind of backgrounds, and a lot of the research that I looked at kind of supports what I see, at least at work, on a daily basis in the area that I live in. For evaluations, I just evaluated the articles by going through and highlighting and taking notes and all sorts of things on what I thought was going to be important and would really help for my capstone final paper. I ended up using about 10 to 12 articles that I evaluated that I think are really relevant for this topic, and I'll be incorporating those into my final paper that's due next week. What I discovered was the needs assessment is one of the most critical parts for the prevention programs. There's a lot of costs that contribute to running a prevention program. You have to get the proper funding through the schools. If you're doing it through a school, you have to make sure that you get permission if you're doing it outside of that. There's a lot of negative outcomes and costs to society as a whole from adolescents who don't enroll in prevention programs and adolescents who are using substances. Not only are the adolescents dying from their drug use, there's illness, disability, there's all sorts of auto accidents and injuries and property damage and things along those lines. One of the articles that I used talked about how we were approaching $273 billion in direct treatment and supportive costs for adolescents alone who are going through substance abuse issues. So we really need to pay attention to the needs assessment to make sure that we're looking for the proper ways to come across with our programs, and make sure that we're really targeting the right people. A high percentage of adolescent substance abusers have drug use in their immediate family. This is something that's important. If the adolescent has parents, like I said before, who are using substances, it might be more likely that that adolescent will use it as well. The parent actions significantly impact the children or the adolescent. What the parents do, the children tend to model, and the behavior that's displayed sometimes is not always the best influence. So there's not really an overall problem that I'm looking to solve. I was more looking for research and information on my topic, but I did find some suggestions that I think are important. Family involvement is so important, especially the family atmosphere. An adolescent who comes from a home that is supportive and loving and nurturing may be less likely to use substances. It doesn't mean that they won't, it just means that they might be less likely to use them, according to all the articles that I've looked through. Disadvantaged neighborhoods can be trouble. Children who are not supervised properly and who are hanging out with children or teenagers who are older than them may find themselves in dangerous situations. Paying more attention to children and adolescents in a positive way can decrease the chances of adolescents using substances. This is absolutely true. When the child feels loved and nurtured, there's less of a reason to turn to drugs and alcohol in order for them to cope with their emotions. These are my references that I used in the PowerPoint. Like I said, I'm going to have about 10 to 12 articles I'm going to be using in my final paper next week. These just kind of touch the surface a little bit, talking a lot about family and a lot about prevention strategies. So I think that it's just, in conclusion, overall important to remember that substance use prevention tends to be the most effective when programs really focus on the family and when programs incorporate all of the family, not just the parents, family members, people who are close to them, perhaps their guardians. And overall, at the end of the day, we do need to strengthen our prevention programs.